Hey, how's it going? This is M.L.S. Weech, and welcome to another weekly episode where I take a look at the new releases on Amazon and look at the covers and see which ones stand out. And then I give you a chance to vote for your favorite in a link down below. And since I'm talking about voting down below, do me a favor and click on the subscribe button and on the like button. And if you can give it a share, that'd be a real big help to me. And also in the links down below is the link to my author page. So if you're really feeling generous, you can go to my author page, take a look at some of my books and see if any of them might interest you. For now, we're ready to get started with this next round of book covers. And we always start by talking about the winner from the previous event. And right now, that means we can announce the winner for the last week of the month of May. And that winner is, I gotta click this up. This isn't meant to be as dramatic as it sounds. Facing Off by Tanya Ross. So I thought this was a really cool retro cover. I like the font. I like the entire 80s feel of it. It's just a charming cover. It still uses the silhouette overlay that's become pretty common these days. But 80s retro is all the way back in with television, movies, even music. We're seeing a lot of that transitioning. So this cover falls right into that niche, and it really checks all the right boxes for a child of the 80s like myself. So that is the winner. Congratulations to the designer and to Tanya Ross. And that allows us to do our book cover of the month for the month of May, which will also be in the link down below. Facing Off joins 4 other covers, including my own. So you'll be able to pick your favorite for all the covers out of the month of March. And then we can get on with talking about the book covers for the second week of June, which is what we're doing right now. And the first book cover we want to talk about for the second week of June is called A Touch of Mail. I gotta back up, and A Touch of Malice is actually the name of the cover, and this by Scarlett St. Clair. I really love the detail and the use of color. So you have this bronzish gold color throughout the image that's dominant, and then these little splashes of red, and it creates a beautiful pattern when you look at it long enough. And the detail in the vine work or bronze work or gold work, depending upon what you want to call it, is in itself very, very well done. It's just a beautiful use of line art, beautiful way of weaving the font throughout the cover. If you'll notice, some of the letters are in the front, like you can see the whole layer, the whole letter, and some of the lettering is behind, and that gives a great feeling of depth. The next book cover we want to talk about is Blood After Dawn. Now, this book cover is not the most original concept in here. Really, the thing that stood out most to me is typically when you have red on red on red, it becomes just a giant mess. But this designer used backlighting well to help the roses stand out in the blood red background. It's an interesting use of putting the name of the series in the whatever kind of eclipse that is we're looking at. And it's a spot to put it. I just think that the font is pretty pretty poorly chosen. You have this really great font that is a part of the design in the Blood After Dawn text down below in the title text, and you got the rose vines coming around and weaving through it, a lot like what we saw with the last cover. The title text, the author text is all the way down at the bottom in front of the black part of the image, and then you got this kind of hokey lettering in the middle of the moon, and that's a pretty dominant spot. When you put a circle or any kind of frame around text, it really brings that text out. So That leaves a little bit to be desired from my point of view, but the way those roses and the way the artist maintained the integrity of the color and the texture of the color, even someone like me who's actually red green colorblind, I can actually make out the individual shapes on the roses, and that absolutely demonstrates some very careful working with shading, with lighting, and the manner the title text was used and the font that the title text uses is also well chosen. So there's a lot going on for it, even despite the unfortunate series text there in the middle of the moon. The next cover we want to talk about is 99 Days by Matt Converse. So this is all about feel. Uh, Again, being a child of the 80s, I look at this and it takes me right back to the Transformers movie. It's got beautifully rendered metal. Metal is actually a very, very difficult thing to photograph or depict in art because it's a reflective substance. So if you want to light it interestingly, you got to be ready to accept specular highlights. And if you don't want those highlights, then it has to be boring light. What the designer did to counter that in this case is they gave him the red eyes, which is also kind of a cool villainy robot kind of thing that they do. The detail in all this metal is also very, very interesting. The font is well chosen, if not very great. It at least fits for the theme, and the author text is put in a wise spot. So while the metalwork and all of these elements maybe aren't the most amazing detail that you'd see in some of the higher fantasy books and things like that, the sheer detail of how they put it together and the way that they rendered everything to make it look even more cool still is it's worthy of note. The next book we want to talk about is The Princess Purge. Um, I don't do a lot of single dominant wow. I don't do a lot of single dominant visuals, uh, and it's because they're not necessarily my favorite thing in the whole wide world. But what we're seeing here is the trend for this week appears to be interweaving of text. I didn't actually do that on purpose, but now that I'm sitting here and looking at everything as it comes together, it's really kind of standing out to me. But you have this very well rendered crown surrounded by this very, very well chosen text. All in all, this might be the best text I've seen in the bunch so far. And I really like the use of, there's this technique called spot color or color sampling. And what the designer did is you look at the shades of, I think it's green, again, red, green, colorblind. And what they did is they created a gradient, and that's the color that we see in this font. So even though we're choosing a font that's going over an object, we typically want to avoid putting things on top of things. But when those elements create depth, and when you use color to help them stand out and put everything on a nice clean background, you mitigate the problem that's usually caused when you're just throwing one thing on top of another. So any future designers out there, uh, you don't want to all willy-nilly just throw stuff on top of other stuff. But if you're gonna do it, you have to use color and shape and light to help those things stand out, which is another trend that we're seeing from this week's covers. The next image we want to take a look at is Hidden Ashes by AC Washer. Now, ultimately, this cover, as you'll see here in a moment, is more or less just I call this a standard portrait style cover. You're going to see this in YA romance, uh, uh, paranormal stories, a series. You're going to see this an awful lot. So you see Raining Fae, book one. Anytime you have that kind of stuff, and you can't really get mad at authors for doing this. Jim Butcher does it. It's a very, very common trope. So when you're going to do a portrait style cover for a paranormal or magic or fantasy series, you have to try to stand out in some way, whether it be the interest of the subject, the detail in the background, the way you use light, whatever you're going to do. Because I promise you guys, if you do what I did today and you go through Amazon and you just look at it, you'll see 17, 18, 19 covers in a row of figures standing in front of landscape as a portrait. They're holding a staff, they're holding a wand, they're holding a ball of fire. It's so done that to stand out, you have to do something. And in this case, they use light, they use color, and they use detail. So why this particular cover stood out to me outside of a bunch, like the whole page was just images that look very much like this, but this one stood out because the lighting on the model was realistic. The model is backlit, which helps the model stand out, or the figure, if you want to use that term. And then the detail in the background is exceptional. On top of all that, you have this well-chosen contrasting text, title text, that helps to bring everything together. And while at the end of the day, it's still another portrait style cover, at least it's a good portrait style cover. And if you're like me and you're scrolling for a book, you can't help but notice it. So it's important when you're making that design to think of it. But another thing I want to take a chance to talk about, since I'm talking about portrait style covers, look, my current release is another portrait style cover. So it's not a crime, but authors who are working on their next books, designers who are getting requests for books, you want to know when everybody's doing something, because if everybody's doing it, how are you going to stand out? I stood out using motion blur. If you go back and look at my book cover, this cover stands out because of color and detail in the background. But it might also be wise to consider doing something different. The danger with that is when you have this style that's happening, people are like, I'm looking for a fantasy series. Oh, look, it's a portrait style cover. That must be a fantasy series I want to look at. So there's a reward and cost. You're either going to be the one that stands out in a crowd, and when you're the one who stands out in the crowd, it's either because you are impressing them, like, wow, hey, that's different. It looks cool. I'm going to pick this up. Or because it's not what they're looking for. And they're going to see and they'll be like, wow, that doesn't look like the other books I like. This looks nothing like the Dresden Files, so I don't want it. I'm not really here to tell you which to do, but I am here to tell you that if you're going to probably stay in what I would say is the safer route, where your cover looks like a lot of other covers, then you better make that image high quality so that it really looks like one of the Dresden File books or any of those other New York Times bestselling authors who are out there. So this cover gives me a lot of opportunity to talk about it, and this cover does it with the color in the background, the detail in the background, and the well-chosen font. Next cover we want to talk about is actually a ship battle cover. It's the Gallant by J.J. Green. And when you're doing ship covers, you really have to know your light. You really have to know your light source, and you have to get creative with where you provide highlights. Because again, if you're in the depth of space, there's really no light. So what are you using to light your subjects? So obviously you're going to have the afterburn of the ship. You typically see some sort of star flare, and then the weapons tend to do stuff. That doesn't mean that there's no visuals. Otherwise, where would we have all these satellite photos coming from? So the starscape is cool. I like the off-color asteroid belts. The ships themselves look well done. The font is well chosen. The composition of the ships, usually when you have more than one ship, you're going to have one up here and one down here somewhere, things like that, because people like it's called a rule of thirds. So even now, if you're looking at this screen, you got 1, 2, 3, 4, those spots right there. That's where the eye goes, especially here in America, because we read left to right. So that's where the eye instinctively wants to find things. This cover takes a little bit of a risk in that the larger object is further back and sort of in the middle, but the brighter object, the afterburn of the more closer ship, is right there on that lower left row of third, which is not as commonly looked at. So it's a little interesting, but when you break a norm, you draw attention, and that's what this cover is doing. Well chosen font, well chosen author text. It's putting the spot that's out of the way. Nothing looks slapped on. Honestly, whenever I look at covers, the thing that turns me on the most is when I look at something and I can tell that the text just looks slapped on. And so here, where everything goes together and the colors line up, it just makes it stand out. It just makes it a higher quality image. The last cover we're going to look at is one that I've seen a lot of lately. It's A Clash of Fates by Philip C. Quaintrell. I may have pronounced that wrong, but you're going to get over it. So first off, anytime you have a dragon in your cover, I'm at least going to look at it, especially if it's a well-designed dragon. I like that the figure is framed in the crane of the dragon's neck. That's a very cool touch. I don't really think I need the figures in the faded background. It seemed like a little much to me, but the detail and rendering of this knight is just fantastic. Part of me thinks I can zoom in and see individual strands of hair, and that's really great. Um, I like that if the individual is going to do opaque foregrounds or opaque layers. And what I mean is you can kind of see a little bit through this cape. You can silently see a little bit through this dragon. You don't want what's behind them to be distracting. I don't know what I lose if I can see the figure and the dragons and just get rid of these soldiers in the background. I don't know what I lose in that. So it feels a little busy for me. But at the very least, I'm not looking through this main figure at some other distracting element. I'm not looking through this individual or distracted by what's in the image, as opposed to seeing that there's more to be seen. So ultimately, this cover really stands out. The dragon looks very cool, and the light is not bad, if not super dramatic. I mean, it's side lit, so there are shadows that are interesting, but the dramatic tone of those shadows. Now, I'm way more, come on, what's the word? Clint Eastwood is a director who I appreciate. Maybe not so much for the content of his stories, but absolutely for the way he lights things. It's just super, super powerful. It's always super contrasty. So, me personally, I like contrasting light to draw my attention, but that's a very personal preference. Some people like softer light, some people like less contrast in their light. You have to have some, and once you have some, the degree you do it is really more playing toward your known audience. So that's the last cover. We've gone over the 7 for this week. So what I need you to do is please hang out, move on down to the link below, pick your favorite cover, maybe leave a comment or two explaining which one was your favorite and why. And don't forget, this particular episode, we have 2. You're going to have the winner for this particular week, and then you're going to get to vote for the cover of the month. And I truly hope you'll take a moment to do that, because it's something that I want to grow. It's something that I want to use to give graphic designers and cover designers more credit for, because there's not enough out there. So as always, I thank you for hanging out with me today. Please enjoy your weekend and be blessed.